Hello everybody, I'm Bede, aka The Terrible Australian, the co-host of Super Podcast and as well as a contributor to supermarcy.com, and welcome to the second edition of my MIFF 2012 video reviews. For this edition I'll be reviewing the new documentary Room 237 and as well as this year's Sundance hit film The Session starring John Hawkes and Helen Hunt. So let's dive right into it. Room 237 is a documentary that analyzes the many theories on the hidden meanings of Stanley Kubrick's classic masterpiece of a horror film, The Shining. And this is a really interesting documentary. It's really entertaining and it's very thought-provoking. And I can tell you this, after watching this film, I will never look at The Shining the same way again, because what this documentary does extremely well is that it kind of goes in depth into the many different types of theories that a lot of people have with the film, and particularly we get a couple of interviewees who express their own theories on what The Shining is actually about. Some of the many different theories that people bring up in the documentary include that the film is really actually about the genocide of Native Americans. Another theory is that it's about the Holocaust. And of course, as you would expect, with some kind of conspiracy theory involving director Stanley Kubrick, it actually goes whether or not that Stanley Kubrick was involved with the moon landing, which of course we all know is not true, but it still makes for an interesting discussion within the documentary. And it's interesting because a lot of the elements that these different theories bring up when you're watching the documentary is really fascinating, because there's certain little things that you've never really noticed when you watch the film, and that when these theories come up and their explanation as to what they believe these hidden meanings are within the film is just really fascinating. And there are things I never even expected at all whenever I watch it, the countless of times I've watched The Shining. And it's a really interesting and fascinating analysis on the film, and what I really liked about the film is that it's a good the film what the film does really well is that it examines how we as people interpret different things from films, whether it be The Shining or other Stanley Kubrick films or just any type of films in particular, that whether whatever film we watch, we take away something different from it. Like what one person's interpretation of one film could be completely different from somebody else's interpretation of the second film. And I think the documentary does a really good job of that, and it makes for a very interesting viewing, and it definitely gives me, as someone who's a huge fan of Kubrick, a lot more respect to him as a director. If some of these theories are actually correct, and he actually did put these elements within the story, it just makes the film a much more fuller and more in-depth experience. Of course, there are some aspects which I think that certain moments within the film, I think some of the interviewees, I think we're looking a little too much into it, but it does make for a very entertaining and insightful viewing. In terms of negatives about the film, I feel like it kind of goes on a little too long. I think because the film goes for about 100 minutes, and I kind of feel like it could have been a much shorter film, because at times during the course of the film it does become a bit repetitive, because they sort of cover the same type of things that somebody else covered earlier on the film. And like it's interesting, but I think it could easily had just been trimmed down, and it would have been a much more tighter film. Um, but one of the things I find really good about the documentary is that um, it sort of doesn't. You never see any of the interviewees at all during the film. It sort of shows the filmmaking style of the film is sort of, it has a mixture of animation, sort of reenactments and clips from The Shining, but also from other Stanley Kubrick films. There's sort of a really funny sort of ongoing joke throughout the film that anytime something shocking happens, like within one of these theories, they cut to a clip of Tom Cruise in Eyes Wide Shut and for his reaction, and it's that's pretty funny. And the film is really funny as well. Like it is really enjoyable, and there are some really funny moments. Like there's one section where one interviewee goes into the sexual nature of the story, and it goes into one sort of certain shot which anytime I'm going to watch the film from now on, I'm never going to look at that same scene ever again. And it's funny though, because when they showed that same scene again later on in somebody else's theories on the film, my audience was just cracking themselves up laughing because of what we knew about that scene earlier. And yeah, and it's a really good film. It's a really solid film, and I definitely recommend anyone who is a big fan of Stanley Kubrick or The Shining or anything about films, whether or conspiracy films. It's definitely worth a watch. It's not perfect, but it's definitely a really good one. And if I had to give it a rating out of 5, I give it a solid 3.5. Now my next film is the Sessions. The Sessions is a film about the true life story of Mark O'Brien, who as a child suffered from polio, which confined him to an eye lung for pretty much the rest of his life. But despite that, he was able to become a famous writer and a famous poet. But then one day, at the age of 38, after sort of romantic setbacks, he confides to his priest, played wonderfully in the film by William H. Macy, that he wants to lose his virginity. And at first his priest isn't sure what to make of it, and then he sort of and then decides to help him, and also with the help, well as his therapist, who's played in the film by Moon Bloodgood. Mark this, or I should have said Mark in the film is played by John Hawkes. Decides to hire a sex surrogate who, to help him lose his virginity, who in the film is played by Helen Hunt. It's a really enjoyable film. It's a definite crowd pleaser. My audience with this one absolutely loved it, and there was a huge amount of applause at the end. I'm not going to say it's an amazing film by any means, but it's still a really good one. And I think one of the key things about this film that works for me are the performances. John Hawkes as Mark, he is absolutely fantastic, and it's great to see him finally in a lead role. And Helen Hunt is also terrific as well, and it's definitely her best performance in a long time, probably since her Oscar-winning turn in As Good as It Gets. And the supporting cast, William H. Macy and Moon Bloodgood, are also equally good. And the film is really funny, and it's also quite emotional. And I think that's all due to the fact is the film's writer-director Ben Lewin, who brings a lot of compassion and a lot of dignity to this story, which could have easily have been exploitive, but he brings a lot of sincerity and compassion to the story and of its characters, and his script is absolutely wonderful. It's a beautifully written screenplay, and his direction is quite good as well. and it beautifully balances both comedy and drama. And I just really thought that the film was a really good and really interesting take on a subject that we haven't really seen much in films, which is, of course, about sex and the disabled. Um, and I think the movie does extremely well at capturing that. And and also, it's a crowd pleaser. It's a film that everyone is going to enjoy. And I can definitely see this film being huge around Oscar time. I don't think it's going to be a Best Picture contender, but I can definitely see both John Hawkes, um, Helen Hunt, and also Ben Lewin's screenplay being Oscar contenders, because believe me, they're that good. Um, in terms of negatives, I kind of feel like the last 15 minutes of the film was a bit rushed, only because the film introduces this key character to the story, which I would have loved that the film explored more, but the film kind of rushes past that to get to the end of the story. Um, but other than that, it's still a really good film, and I definitely suggest everyone to check it out when it hits theaters. It's a really, really good film. If I had to give it a rating out of 5, I'd give it a solid 4 stars. It's a good film, and I really enjoyed it a lot. Um, I hope you all enjoyed my second MIFF video review. Keep a lookout for my third edition, which I'll be discussing the horror anthology VHS, and as well as William Friedkin's new film Killer Joe. I'll see you all then. Bye.